Hi guys, so the motion today is that this house believes that humanity should establish a space colony by 2050. So let's start with the context. I think it's really important to establish early on that this is a debate about what's better for humanity in the present and in the future, right? The motion very clearly, very explicitly states a timeline. It says by 2050. So this creates a sense of urgency, and it says by X date we need to do X thing. So this is less a debate about a principle, whether or not in general we should explore, or in general exploration or establishing a colony is a good idea. It's about whether or not we should set this target and we should do this thing. And that presumes that there is a compelling reason to do that, right? So, and that is what I mean by that context. So the context about the present and future challenges that require us to set this ambitious target and work towards that target, right? So I'll get to what I think that context is in a minute, but I want to establish very early on that that's what this debate's about. It's less about a kind of principle of what's right and wrong, but about how do we deal with these problems, right? I think this debate is also less about the feasibility of establishing a space colony. There is an arbitrary date, and there's a lot of science. There's a lot of people who say that it is possible and we should do it. Very eminent people like Stephen Hawking, but it's going to be very difficult for you to establish beyond reasonable doubt in this debate whether or not this is 100% feasible or not 100% feasible. So it's more a debate about whether we should strive to do that, right? If on the op you say it's more 2065, more 2075 or something, that's not going to end up winning you the debate. It's more about whether this direction is a good direction for us to go in as humanity. Okay, so having established that, let's look at the cases. I'll start with the proposition. I think the notion or the theme that you want to take in the proposition is that this is an extension of what we as humanity have been doing. You know, we want to extend the human race into space. Humanity as a whole has always been exploring and extending ourselves across the planet and extending ourselves into space through exploration. And this is just a natural extension of that. And furthermore, right now, there are pretty compelling reasons why we need to do that. Okay, so the three arguments I'm going to discuss with you on the government side are firstly, the preservation of humanity. I think that's really important to get out at the start. Secondly, why space? Having established that it's important to preserve humanity, why going through space, a space colony is necessary to preserve humanity. And thirdly, the benefits from this effort to set up this colony, right? And the benefits for everyone other than those who will end up being or living on this colony. So let's get to that. Firstly, preservation of humanity, right? This is the context I was talking about. So you need to establish from Gov that there are huge, compelling reasons why we need to take this very drastic step and make this commitment to establish another home, because that's what this colony is going to be, right? Another home outside of planet Earth. And there are a few big reasons. So things like, climate change, or the possibility of nuclear conflict, or overpopulation, right? And you can run all of these three things, but you want to establish some of these clear reasons, and you'll drill them down a little bit, right? A lot of people argue with climate change that we've already hit a turning point. And even if we cut CO2 emissions, and even if we set up adaptation strategies, we've reached a point where the water's melting, and the melting water is retaining heat, which is melting the ice, which is creating more water, which is melting more ice, and the cycle has continued, and the warming has hit a point of no return, right? So you can make that argument that it's got so bad and it's only going to get worse. You can also make the argument that there's the possibility of war in this current climate. That's very easy to believe because we've got, such awesome leaders and leadership by Twitter, and people who believe, and not just individuals, right? Not just Kim Jong-un, and not just Donald Trump. Around the world, there seems to be this predisposition to use threat and weapons and war and less hope and peace and calmness, right? It's more about aggression. But you don't have to say the whole world's going to blow themselves up. All you need to show is that it's likely or even if there's like a 1% chance one madman is going to explode one hydrogen bomb, that's enough to kind of wipe out a large corner of the world and could send us into a bit of a spiral. If there's a huge cloud, blocks of the sun, etc., etc. You don't have to be too catastrophic, but if it is reasonable that there could be something incredibly harmful and dangerous that happens to the world, what is our plan B, right? What is our backup plan? And if you create that idea, that may be enough for us to think about the fact that humanity does need a sort of backup plan. Because otherwise, if it gets too late, we don't really have anything to rely on, we don't have anything to fall back on, right? The other argument around this whole Earth is ending strategies is this notion around overpopulation. And for me, this is actually the most reasonable one, right? The Earth's population is 6-7 billion people now, and a lot of people argue that we've already reached the point of peak Earth. And that is the idea that there's enough things on Earth to sustain the population, and we've gone beyond that point, right? We're already milking more from the Earth than the Earth can give us or than is sustainable. And some people predict, well, experts, very clever people predict that by 2050 we're going to hit 9 billion people on the planet, right? And that's going to lead to issues of food scarcity, more important, water scarcity. That will lead to all the problems that migration is causing now already. That will lead to more conflict. And then you factor that with the climate change, you factor that with crazy people with weapons. You can see that things may not look very bright for the human population or for humanity. Okay, so the first thing government or proposition needs to establish is the Earth is not in a fantastic place. People aren't doing really that well. We need to try, and this is also important. You're not saying we give up on Earth and on the people here, because there's a lot of people here, but you argue that we need a backup plan, right? We need something else in case things get really, really bad. Because, you know, we're talking about many years from now, right? So say 250, right? Like 500 years in the future, if we've reached that point where Earth is really not sustainable, maybe we've got to, you know, the whole Star Trek generation, infinity and beyond, and we've got, you know, the USS Federation and so on, and we've got colonies in space, and we've spread across the universe, right? Maybe we'll get to that stage, but that stage starts now. And just in case the Earth melts, we need to have this backup plan. Okay, so that's the first point that you make. But remember, also say that we're going to work on Earth, and I'll get to that bit a little bit later. But start strong with the preservation of humanity. If you can't show a sense of urgency, this whole thing about pushing for 2050 isn't really going to work. Second thing is, why space? So now you've established that Earth is not in a great situation. Why should we go look at space as a second place to set up as a colony, right? So very quickly you talk about how there are less options on Earth. We've explored, like, you know, most of the arable and livable area. We've got the ocean, which is the larger part of it, but it's really difficult to do things in the ocean. But also the Earth is more delicate, right? We can start drilling underground or trying to live in the water, but that may create more problems, right? And you don't want to. We've already established that Earth is in a very fragile situation. And here's also where you can talk about the human condition of exploration. That since our beginning of humanity, the Homo sapien did much better than all the other types of human beings because we traveled, we migrated, we adapted. And here you argue that this is a part of who we are and part of us looking to space and wanting to go beyond, but also it's possible because we've always done that, right? Thousands of years ago, when we were all in Africa, the other part of the continent was like space, and we managed to move and we crossed seas and oceans, and we thought we will fall over the side of the ocean, and we didn't, and we continued to explore. So this is why space, because there are less options on Earth, but also because we are built to explore and to adapt. The last argument you run on Gov is that there'll be benefits for everybody. Everybody will have something from this party. So even if you don't end up going into space, space exploration and space colonization and living in space has humongous benefits, right? Just like we've already experienced from the space race, medical advancements advancements in battery technology or in life preservation technology or transportation technology or material science, but also the ability to explore, to get value from the experiments that we do in space. So us, humanity, pushing ourselves to do these things that we don't think we can do, establishing a colony in space, will create advancements in science and technology that we can use and will benefit us here down on Earth, right? Part of this benefits also, you can run an argument about the value of exploring space or mining. Some people say, well, you can mine asteroids or, and get precious materials, and you can do that without necessarily establishing a colony, but it's going to be a lot harder without establishing a colony, right? So if you want, and if you have space and you think this is interesting, that's something you can throw into the benefits piece. But what you're trying to do, the strategic value of this argument, is to show that even if not everyone ends up going to space, we will be able to get things that will benefit everybody, right? And government is hoping that Earth will preserve itself and we'll all be like living happily ever after, but we need to expand beyond Earth, and this is where we can expand. Okay, so that's proposition for me. Why we need to preserve humanity, number one. Number two, why we need to go to space to preserve humanity. And number three, how this journey is going to benefit everyone. Opposition. What do you do in opposition, right? So in opposition, don't be Luddites in opposition. You like space and you like travel, but you think that this is going to be worse for humanity, right? So in opposition, I think you can say, let's explore space, let's learn things, but we have one home, and we need to preserve that one home, which is planet Earth. The three arguments I think you should run on OP, or you could run on OP, if you like. The first one, we should preserve our home on Earth, and show how going to space is going to harm this mission. Secondly, it is immoral. This direction is immoral, right? Hear me out. And thirdly, it may lead to unintended consequences. And there's a little bit of fluidity around the third argument piece, and I'll get to there in a minute, some strategic considerations. So first one, that we need to preserve home on Earth. So proposition would have argued that we can do both, right? It's not mutually exclusive. We can go into the stars and we can take care of what we have at home. But on OP you say, dude, this is just like unrealistic, right? Because you have finite resources. It's less likely that you are going to really, really care about what happens on Earth if you've got this big backup plan up there on space, right? So, and it's also, you're going to have less resources. You're going to have less political resources. You're going to have less just money and time and intelligence and scientists and all of these different things that you need to commit to your space adventure. Because this space adventure is going to be really, really expensive. Even just going to the moon or to the space station is really expensive, right? NASA and the European Space Agency are struggling for cash, and so much so that now they've opened up the market to private companies, right? Like Elon Musk and SpaceX and all of these other people are investing heavily in space because governments don't have enough money. So we have these finite resources. We should spend them on preventing climate change, and we should spend them on adaptation strategies, because the sea level is going to rise, and we need to create carbon capture tools and technologies. We need to help people move somewhere else that is safer. We need to find ways to get this heat out. We need to do things that will preserve our Earth as the only Earth that we have, right? So instead of spending all this very, very expensive resources. It's a strategic piece that you can do here, but I'll get to that in a minute. And it's possible at this point, and this is going to be a huge clash in the debate, which one of these things are more practical? Is it more practical to create a space colony, or is it more practical to fight or overturn or reverse climate change, right? So the burden on both of these teams is to come across as a little bit more credible and just show which one is slightly more possible. You don't have to, and you can't prove without a benefit of doubt, because these are both incredibly contentious things, but you need to show that one may be more possible than the other, but also argue why the direction is more important, right? The paradigm, the philosophy that you're taking, and why this philosophy is more important. The philosophy of exploration or the philosophy of trying to preserve home. Okay, so that's the first bit that you do on OP. You say it's really more important to preserve home. It's more feasible than going into space, but it's also just something we need to prioritize, right? So this is our one home. This is something we need to commit everything to and not get distracted. Second thing, immoral. Now, this argument says that it's not a moral solution, right? Because even if you succeed, what happens is not everyone's going to benefit. A lucky few people are going to be able to benefit from this. These are going to be the scientists, these are going to be the elite, these are going to be the super rich people that you will handpick and you will save and go somewhere else, right? And coupled with that first argument about how this could be counterproductive, you're showing that it's about the rich and the wealthy and the smart who are doing something to preserve themselves at the expense of the others. Because it's the people who are going to be harmed for climate change, who are being harmed now, are the poorest people, right? The ones who are living in flood-prone areas, the ones who are living in the developing world, who can't move and run away. And those aren't the people who are going to benefit from your space colony mission, right? Most likely, a few thousand people are going to benefit from this out of the 9 billion people on the planet, okay? I think part of this immoral argument is also you can run or maybe split this out into a harms piece if you like, that this will lead to the corporatization and the commoditization of space. Okay, it's going to open the door for private firms and big companies to step in and to take over space, right? And this is a strong parallels to how colonization happened before, right? When the West moved into the rest of the world and colonized them, the people who did that became incredibly rich. A lot of the early settlers at that point were like the poor or prisoners, but it's highly unlikely we're going to send the poor and prisoners into space this time. So it's going to be completely just something that the rich control and own and benefit. Okay? Now, I think the strategic piece here that I alluded to when I was talking about the preservation piece is you can try to push the Gov team into a bit of a catch-22, right? So if you ask them who's going to fund this, right? So is it going to be funded by the government? Is it going to be funded by the private companies? And if it's going to be funded by the government, then this feeds into your prioritization of resources argument, right? Because governments don't have that much resources, so they should be helping the poor, they should be giving aid, they're spending billions, trillions on establishing a space colony, and it's going to be really expensive, right? If you think about just the amount it takes to send people into space, that's a lot of money. So imagine sending thousands and thousands of people, right? So maybe government says, oh, well, not government will spend money, private firms will spend money, Elon Musk will spend money. Then that feeds into your second argument about the morality piece, that it will be immoral. Because now private companies are going to do things for profit. So private companies will want to own the colony, private companies will want to profit from it, private companies will want rights. The same way private firms, companies, early explorers carved up the rest of the world and said that I own chunks of Australia and I own chunks of the Americas, and I'm going to name all these places after me. Okay, so you can push this kind of catch-22 argument from up, trying to get a wedge into the funding, see whether it's governments funding it or corporations funding it, and either way, try to get something out of that. Okay, so that's the immoral piece, the second argument that you run on op. And the third thing that you run, and this is, I think here you have a little bit of space depending on the strategy you want to take from op. You can try to like drill down on the possibilities on Earth, of surviving Earth, right? So adaptation strategies or different places that we can live in, or try to argue that it's not that bad and there's a tilt forward, right? Because if you think strategically you need to win that context, then you can commit a third argument to that. Or you can run an unintended consequences argument, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen in space. The history of humanity has shown that we tend to make pretty bad mistakes, and any place we go and colonize, we destroy. So if we go to, Io or Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, where it seems pretty likely there is water and maybe chances that we can colonize, we may end up destroying it, and we don't know what harm that's going to cause to the environment there, but also to the balance of the universe. Are we throwing more junk into space? Could we be creating more holes in the ozone by increasing our exploration and burning more rocket fuel? Could we be speeding up the destruction of Earth in a way, right? We don't know. We really, really don't know. Okay, so we really need to be focusing here. And more than just don't know, you need to argue that it's possible that we're going to cause all this harm. But because of all these possible unintended consequences and our history of doing really bad things, let's focus at home and solve our own problems, right? So those are the three arguments I would run from up. That we need to preserve our home here on Earth, one home, that this is immoral as a direction and as a paradigm, and there's possibly all these unintended consequences or really good reasons or good areas where we can develop things back home here on Earth. Okay, so my friends, that's my analysis of this motion. The big clashes are going to come down to, as I said, the state of Earth and how big this problem is, but also the paradigm that we should take. Should we be future focused or should we be trying to solve things here? And there is space in this debate, I think, for enjoying the mysteries of science and looking at, both sides in this debate are fascinated by science and the science of space or the science of what's here on home, and where should we as humanity try to focus ourselves. Okay, good luck debating the debate. And if any one of you manage to go to space, peace and prosperity, and take me with you. Enjoy debating.